The hatching deep within the mountains where smoke curled from cracks in the stone and rivers of molten fire ran like living veins. There was a cavern so ancient that even the oldest dragons spoke of it in whispers. It was here that a new clutch of eggs lay among piles of gold coins, scattered bones and jewels that glowed with stolen light. The cavern was filled with the scent of ash and the warmth of flame as the mother dragon kept her heavy wings spread across her brood, waiting for the sound of shells breaking, one by one. The eggs began to crack, and from each emerged young dragons with scales already shimmering in red and black. They hissed and snapped at each other, their eyes glowing with the hunger for fire and treasure. The mother dragon growled with pride, for her kin would grow strong on flame and greed. Yet among them lay one smaller egg, its shell, a strange silver color that gleamed even in the shadows. While the others clawed their way into the world, this egg split, slowly with a sound like a whisper rather than thunder. From it emerged a dragon unlike the rest. Its scales shimmered, not with the fiery tones of its siblings, but with a soft blue sheen. Like the surface of water touched by moonlight, its eyes opened wide, and instead of burning hunger, they reflected curiosity. The baby dragon blinked at the piles of gold and jewels around it, but felt no spark of desire for them, while its brothers and sisters scrambled to claim coins and bite at one another. For gems, the small dragon simply tilted its head as if listening to something beyond the cavern walls. The mother dragon watched with suspicion but said nothing, for in time she believed instinct would guide the young one back to the path of fire. And fury, she turned her gaze back to her other children and allowed them to wrestle and roar. Yet the small dragon wandered near the edge of the cavern, where faint currents of air carried scents from the world above it, smelled not only of smoke, but of grass water and something faintly sweet. Days passed and the young dragons grew. They fought over piles of treasure, tested their wings in bursts of fire, and dreamed only of conquest. The small dragon, however, spent its hours near the cavern entrance, where a crack in the stone allowed glimpses of the world outside. One day, while the mother and most of the brood slept, the small dragon pressed close to the opening and peered through the crack. What it saw made its heart stir in ways it could not understand. A human walked below the cliffs. The figure carried no weapons, only a sack slung across its back and a staff in hand. The human moved slowly, stopping often to look at plants and rocks, collecting pieces and murmuring to itself. The dragon did not know why, but its chest fluttered with excitement. It wanted to see more. It wanted to understand why the fragile creature seemed unafraid of walking in the shadow of dragon territory. For many nights the baby dragon returned to the crack and watched the human. The figure returned often, sometimes alone, sometimes with a small group. They laughed, shared bread, and pointed at the sky as if the stars told stories. The dragon felt something shift inside it, a strange pull stronger than the call of gold or the thrill of flame. It did not know the word for it, but it was drawn to the warmth that glowed around the human like unseen fire. One evening a storm swept through the mountains. Lightning split the sky and rain hammered. Down the human below slipped on the rocks and cried out as the sack tumbled into a rushing stream. The small dragon pressed against the cavern crack. Heart racing, it wanted to move to help, though its kin slept soundly among treasure and flame, with no care for the fragile creature outside. The baby dragon trembled with indecision until finally it crept forward, slipping out of the cavern for the first time. The rain struck its scales, cold and harsh, unlike the fire it knew, yet it spread its wings awkwardly and glided down toward the human. The human stared wide-eyed, frozen in shock at the sight of the young dragon descending from the storm. But instead of fire and claws, the creature landed between the human and the rushing stream, its small body trembling with effort as it used its tail to hook the fallen sack and push it back to shore. The human gasped, unable to believe what had happened, as the dragon turned its glowing blue eyes on them. Something passed between them, a silent recognition. The baby dragon had chosen to act not for gold, not for fire, and not even for its kin, but for the sake of a fragile life. In that moment a bond was forged, though neither could name it, and though the storm raged above the cavern of fire and treasure had already lost one of its children to a different destiny. The first choice. The storm passed, leaving the mountains washed clean. The air was sharp with the scent of wet stone and pine. The baby dragon stood uncertainly on the slick ground, its wings drooping from the effort of its first flight. The human still stared, unable to believe that a dragon had not burned them alive. The sack lay safe beside the stream, and the dragon nudged it once more, as if to be sure then, turned its gaze back to the human who trembled not from the storm but from confusion and fear. The human raised a hand slowly as though approaching a wild animal that might strike at any sudden move. The dragon tilted its head and took a cautious step closer. There was no growl, no hiss, no fire. Only the strange silence of curiosity. The human whispered a word the dragon could not understand, but the tone was soft, gentle, like the murmuring of water in a stream for the first time in its short life. The dragon felt no threat from another being. It felt something closer to acceptance, though it did not yet know what that meant. For several minutes they stood facing one another, the human breathing unevenly, the dragon's tail flicking nervously. Finally, the human crouched and picked up the sack, clutching it tight before bowing their head in a gesture of respect. The dragon blinked, then gave a small trill of sound almost like a bird's call before leaping into the air, its wings beating unevenly as it soared back toward the cavern. It did not want to be seen gone for long. The mother and kin would question it. When it returned, the cavern was filled with the roar of young dragons fighting over treasure. The mother's eyes glowed as she encouraged them to fight and claw to test their strength. The small dragon crept back to its usual corner near the crack. But its mind was not on the gold or the jewels. Its mind was on the human. Their eyes, their voice, the way they had not screamed in terror even when a dragon landed before them. Something about that memory burned brighter than any flame days turned into weeks. And the dragon found itself sneaking out more often, each time searching for the human. Sometimes it only watched from a distance as the human gathered herbs and stones. Sometimes it followed from the cliffs above. One day, however, it saw the human stumble again, but this time into danger, not from weather, but from wolves thin and starving. Their fur bristled, their teeth bared as they circled the lone figure. The human raised their staff, but the dragon could sense the fear, this time real and sharp. Without thinking, the dragon dove from the cliffs, its wings slicing the air. It landed between the human and the wolves, releasing a roar that shook the stones. The wolves froze, their ears pinned back before fleeing into the trees. The human gasped, clutching the staff tighter, but now there was no fear in their eyes. Only wonder. The dragon turned to face them, its blue eyes glowing in the fading light, and the human dropped the staff to the ground and knelt as if in surrender. The bond deepened that day. The human reached out and touched the dragon's scales with trembling fingers. The dragon shivered at the warmth of the touch. It was unlike fire. It was soft yet powerful, and it stirred something deeper than instinct. The dragon trilled again, and the human laughed, a sound that carried across the valley. In that moment, the dragon knew it had chosen something far greater than gold or flame. It had chosen connection, and in choosing it had crossed a line that could never be undone. When the dragon returned to the cavern, its siblings hissed and snapped their eyes. Narrowing, they smelled the difference on it, the scent of the outside, the scent of human and not of blood. One of the larger hatchlings lunged at it, claws flashing. The small dragon rolled aside, unwilling to fight, but the others laughed cruel laughter that echoed against the stone. The mother watched silently, her gaze heavy with suspicion, but she did not interfere. Perhaps she believed the runt would be crushed soon enough. Night fell, and the dragon lay apart from the others, staring toward the crack where faint starlight filtered through it. Remembered the laughter of the human, the way the staff had been dropped, the gentle touch on its scales. Those memories filled it with warmth, but also with fear, for it knew the others would never understand. And worse, if they discovered the truth, the human might be in danger. The next day, the dragon sneaked away again and found the human waiting. This time, the figure sat on a rock near the stream. Humming softly when the dragon landed, they smiled as if greeting an old friend. In their hands, they held bread and berries, which they set on the ground and pushed forward. The dragon sniffed uncertain, then took the offering in its jaws. The human clapped their hands with joy and laughed again. The dragon's heart swelled with pride, though it had no words to name what it felt. From that day on, the two met in secret. The human taught the dragon gestures and sounds, while the dragon showed the human how to glide on air currents. They became companions, bound not by blood, But by choice, yet each time the dragon returned to the cavern, the divide between it and its kin grew sharper. It no longer cared for treasure, no longer fought over gold. Instead, it longed for the sound of laughter, and the warmth of a hand on its scales, and though it could not yet know it, the choice it had made would soon place both itself and the human in grave danger, rejection from kin. The days of secret meetings between the baby dragon and the human stretched. Into moons, the bond between them grew stronger. With every shared moment, the human gave the dragon small gifts: flowers, polished stones, bits of food. The dragon, in return, guarded the human during their foraging flights and filled the nights with low musical trills that echoed like soft thunder in the valley. It was a strange friendship, one born in the shadow of fear and expectation. Yet somehow it thrived like a fragile flame protected against the wind. But within the cavern, things began to change. The mother dragon grew restless. Her eyes sharp and suspicious, she watched her youngest more closely every time it slunk back into the lair, smelling faintly of earth and rain. Instead of smoke and gold, the siblings too began to notice. They mocked it during feeding, snapping their jaws and lashing their tails, calling it weak runt traitor. Their voices filled with cruel laughter. They would pile their stolen treasures high and ask why it never fought for gems, why it never took coins in its claws. Their taunts stung, but the dragon never struck back. For in its heart it carried something no pile of gold could match: the memory of a human's laughter and touch. One night, as the brood sprawled across heaps of treasure, one of the older siblings challenged the small dragon outright. Its scales glowed red like molten rock, and its wings were broad and scarred from many fights. It stepped before the runt and growled, "You are not one of us. You do not hunger for gold or blood. You spend your nights crawling outside the cavern. Do you seek humans?" The word spat like poison. The smaller dragon lowered its head but said nothing. The other hatchlings hissed in agreement, their eyes filled with scorn. The older sibling lunged, striking with claws. The small dragon dodged but refused to retaliate. The blows rained down, each one a demand to fight, to show strength, to prove loyalty. Yet the runt held back, and when it finally cried out, the cavern roared with laughter. "Weakling, not dragon," they jeered. Even the mother remained silent, her gaze cold as if measuring whether this child was worth raising at all. The small dragon dragged itself back to its lonely corner, nursing cuts and bruises, its heart aching not from wounds, but from rejection. The human saw the marks the next day and gasped, kneeling before the dragon with tears in their eyes. They touched the cuts, gently wrapping them with cloth, torn from their own garments. The dragon shivered at the kindness it had not known such care from its kin, who only demanded strength and fury. The human whispered words the dragon did not understand, but the tone was fierce, protective, a promise unspoken, and the dragon realized that in the eyes of the human it was not weak, it was not lesser, it was simply itself, and that was enough. Yet the tension inside the cavern only worsened soon. The other dragons began to follow the runt when it slipped away. They saw it meeting the human, laughing with them, flying above the valley and returning with strange scents upon its scales. The truth spread quickly. Whispers turned to snarls. Betrayal. Traitor. The words echoed like fire across stone. The older dragons snapped their jaws and demanded the runt prove itself by devouring the human, by burning the village where the creature lived. The small dragon recoiled, its heart twisting with horror. It shook its head and let out a roar of refusal, a roar not of fire, but of defiance. That night the siblings encircled it, their wings spread wide, their eyes blazing with fury. They struck and clawed, driving it toward the cavern wall. The runt fought back at last, but not for treasure, not for dominance. It fought to live. It fought for the memory of the human's hand. Upon its scales, though outnumbered, it lashed out with wings and tail sparks flying. Yet in the end it was too small, too weak to stand against them. Beaten and bloodied, it collapsed as they sneered. "You are no kin of ours, you are no dragon." The mother's voice finally rumbled through the cavern, cold and merciless. "Then leave if you will not be dragon, leave and never return." The words cut deeper than any claw. The runt staggered toward the crack in the wall, its body trembling with pain and sorrow. Behind it, the laughter of its siblings rang cruel and final. The mother turned her gaze away as if it were already dead. The night air hit its wounds like ice, but the dragon forced its wings open and leapt into the darkness. It did not know where. It flew, only that it could not stay. The valley stretched below, and in the distance lights flickered from the human village. It followed that light as if it were the only star in a storm when it landed before the human's dwelling. It collapsed. The human cried out, rushing to its side, their hands frantic, their voice trembling. They pressed against the dragon's wounds, whispering words filled with fear and love. In that moment, as the dragon lay broken yet alive, it realized the truth. It no longer had kin among dragons. Its kin was here, fragile and mortal, yet braver than any it had ever known. It had chosen once before to save the human, now cast out and rejected. It would choose again. It would belong not to fire, not to gold, and not to blood, but to the bond it had found with one who saw it not as weak, but as something worth saving. Growing bonds. The baby dragon woke in the human village with the warmth of a fire close by, though it was not the scorching fire of dragon caverns, but the gentle flicker of hearth flames, the kind that gave light and comfort rather than destruction. The human had built a shelter of wood and stone, where the dragon could rest, its wings bound carefully with cloth, its wounds cleaned with herbs, gathered from the surrounding forests. The dragon stirred weakly, and the villagers gasped, many hiding behind doors and fences, their fear of dragons strong, yet their curiosity stronger. The human, who had become the dragon's only true kin, spoke softly to the others, using words the dragon could not understand, but the tone was soothing. Firm, a promise that the creature would bring no harm. The villagers hesitated, but they saw the wounds across its scales, the bruises, the way it curled. Not in pride, but in exhaustion, they saw not a monster, but something that had been cast out, and they began to see it with new eyes. Over the next days, the dragon healed slowly. The human never left its side, bringing food, water, and comfort. Sometimes singing, softly in the evenings as the stars lit the night sky, the dragon would listen, its head resting on its claws, the sound filling it with a peace greater than any treasure could bring. In return, the dragon began to show small gestures of trust, lowering its head so children could touch its scales, puffing warm, harmless smoke to amuse them, spreading its wings to shade farmers working in the fields. At first the villagers were wary, but soon they began to marvel at the sight. The dragon fetched logs from the forest, carried buckets of water in its jaws, even helped pull heavy carts across muddy ground. Tasks that had once taken days were done in hours. The people whispered among themselves, perhaps this was no curse. Perhaps it was a blessing, a gift from fate. And though they did not forget that dragons had long been enemies, they began to make space in their hearts for one who had chosen a different path. The human and the dragon grew closer each day together. They explored the valleys and the hills, the human teaching words by pointing to things: sky, water, fire, friend. The dragon would repeat in low trills and hums, shaping its voice awkwardly. But learning slowly, they shared food, the human breaking bread and berries, while the dragon caught fish from the rivers, placing them carefully on the ground as offerings in return. It was a language of gestures and trust, and the bond deepened with every sunrise. One evening, as the harvest moon rose, the village gathered for a feast. The dragon lay at the edge of the square, watching as children danced and elders told stories. The human sat beside it, leaning against its scales, speaking softly of tales passed down of how dragons were always seen as bringers of ruin. Yet now those tales seemed different, for here was proof that not all followed the old ways. The dragon tilted its head at the stars, remembering its mother's words that dragons were bound to fire and fury, and for the first time it believed those words were lies, but peace was fragile. As whispers carried far beyond the village, word spread across the mountains that one of the brood had betrayed its kin by siding with humans. Hunters and scouts from distant towns came to see for themselves. Some brought weapons, though they were warned to lower them when they saw the human sitting calmly beside the beast. Others only watched in awe, unable to reconcile what they saw with what they believed. It was said that the baby dragon had turned its back on fire, gold, and blood, that it had chosen humanity, and that such a choice would not go unchallenged. Still, the dragon found happiness in the simple days it soared with the human on its back. Feeling the wind rush past its wings, it guarded the fields. From wolves and bears, it listened to songs sung by the villagers. Though it understood little, it felt the meaning in the rhythm and tone. This was a life built not on fear or dominance, but on sharing. And for the dragon, it was more precious than any jewel hidden in its mother's hoard. Yet even as the bond grew, the dragon knew shadows loomed in the distance in dreams. It heard the roars of its siblings echoing across the mountains, calling it traitor weakling, warning of the firestorm that would one day descend to reclaim its honor. Sometimes it would wake trembling. The human would place a hand on its scales, whispering comfort, until the fear faded. But deep inside, the dragon knew a storm was coming. The villagers too began to sense it. The older ones spoke of omens, dark wings in the skies, flames on the horizon. They whispered of retribution. Dragons did not forgive betrayal. They would come not just for their lost kin, but for the humans who had sheltered it. And so while the village grew to love their strange ally, they also prepared sharpening spears, storing food, teaching the young to hide quickly if fire rained from above. The baby dragon saw all this, and its heart ached. It had brought both joy and danger to those it loved. Still, in the quiet hours under the starlight, the dragon made a vow. It pressed its head against the human's shoulder and closed its eyes. It would not abandon them. It would not flee. Though it was small, though. It was young, though its kin were many and strong. It had chosen once before, and it would choose again if the storm came. It would meet it. Not as a beast of ruin, but as a guardian, for the bond it had found was worth more than gold, fire, or kin, and in that promise lay the seed of a destiny far greater than it had ever imagined. Fire and war. The peace of the valley could not last for long. Dragons were not creatures that forgot betrayal, and the mother of the brood had seen the weakness of her youngest. With eyes of stone, she had cast it out. Yet even she had not imagined the choice it would make when whispers reached her of a human village protected by a dragonling. Her fury shook the mountains. She gathered her brood, her voice thundering, that their sibling had defiled their blood and spat upon their legacy. Their claws scraped the cavern floor. Their wings snapped open as they roared their vow. They would bring ruin to the humans and to the traitor who had abandoned them. The baby dragon did not hear these roars at first. It was with the human learning to hunt fish in the stream while children laughed nearby. The villagers had begun to live without fear, trusting their guardian to keep them safe. The human smiled at the sight of their friend standing tall, wings spread like a banner of hope. But the smile faded when a scout ran breathless into the square, his voice breaking as he shouted of smoke rising in the north, black wings blotting out the sun. The villagers froze. In terror, the elders whispered the word dragon, their old fears rushing back like floodwaters. The baby dragon lifted its head and smelled the air, the scent of fire heavy and bitter. It knew instantly what was coming. Its kin were on the march. It let out a low growl, a sound filled with sorrow and anger. The human touched its scales, whispering words of courage. But the dragon could see fear in their eyes. Fear not for themselves, but for the village, for the children who now clung to their mothers, for the crops that would soon be ash. When the first shadow passed over the valley, the villagers screamed, wings vast as sails darkened. The sky fire poured from the heavens as the brood descended, their roars like thunder. The fields ignited. In moments, homes caught flame. The air filled with the cries of men, women, and children running for shelter. The baby dragon leapt forward, its wings beating desperately. It soared into the firestorm and released a roar of challenge. The sound cracked through the sky, a defiance that made even its siblings falter for a heartbeat. The mother dragon descended, her scales black as night, her eyes glowing with fury. She hissed at the runt, traitor kin destroyer. You stand with them, you burn with them, you shall fall with them. The brood circled, eager for blood, their flames lighting the valley like a second sun. The baby dragon trembled, yet spread its wings wide, placing itself between the village and its kin, its body still small compared to theirs, but filled with a strength born not of greed or fire but of choice. The battle began in chaos. Flames collided in the air as the baby dragon fought desperately, weaving through its larger siblings, dodging claws and teeth, striking with tail and wings. Though smaller, it moved with speed honed by flights through narrow valleys. Its trills of defiance echoed even as fire seared its scales below. The villagers fought too, with bows and spears, though their weapons barely scratched the hides of the great beasts. They fought not alone, for above them their guardian battled with a courage that lit their hearts with fire of its own. The human ran among the villagers, gathering the children, guiding them to the caves at the edge of the valley, shouting commands with a voice strong despite the chaos. They looked back, often eyes searching the skies for the blue shimmer of their friend, and each time they saw it still standing still, defying a dozen greater foes. Their hearts surged with both fear and pride. But the cost was heavy one by one. Homes fell to fire, crops burned, the sky turned red with smoke. The baby dragon took blow after blow, its wings torn, its body scarred. But it would not fall. It hurled itself again and again into the path of its kin, knocking them off course, striking with a ferocity that surprised even the mother, who roared with rage. "How dare you fight for them? They are prey. They are nothing." The small dragon roared back, its voice raw. "They are mine." Those words, though, without speech, thundered in its soul. Its kin felt the meaning, even if not the sound. They recoiled for a breath, stunned by the power in the runt's defiance. But the moment passed and the assault resumed. The mother struck with claws like blades, driving the runt into the ground. The earth cracked. The villagers screamed as they saw their protector pinned, flames gathered in the mother's throat, ready to end it all. The human did not hesitate. They sprinted from the cave, staff in hand and stones clutched in the other. They shouted words that carried across the battlefield, not of fear but of challenge. The mother turned, her massive head eyes narrowing on the tiny figure standing against her rage. And in that instant, the baby dragon surged upward, striking with every ounce of strength it had left, claws tearing, wings beating flame, bursting from its throat. Not to destroy, but to blind the mother. Staggered back, the fire scattering across her scales. The runt forced her off the human and stood again, battered, bloodied, but unbroken. The battle raged on the village in ruins, yet not gone. The people still alive, still fighting beside their strange ally. The baby dragon knew the war had only begun. Its kin would not stop until all was ash, but as it looked to the human at its side, staff-raised eyes burning with determination, it knew it would never again stand alone. It had chosen, and that choice would carry it into fire, war, and destiny itself. The dragon's stand, the valley, was still burning when dawn crept across the mountains, black smoke rising into the sky and the stench of ash heavy in the air. The villagers huddled in what shelters remained, their faces marked with soot and fear, yet their eyes fixed on the baby dragon who lay bruised and battered in the square. The human knelt beside it, whispering words of comfort, hands steady, even though their own arms were burned. The dragon opened its blue eyes and let out a soft rumble. It was alive, but the fight was far from over. Above the mountains, the brood circled again, their roars echoing like rolling thunder. They had withdrawn only to gather strength. The mother's rage was far from spent. She had tasted her runt's defiance, and the taste was bitter. She called her kin to her, demanding that they strike once more, that the valley be reduced to cinders, that the humans be slaughtered for daring to harbor a traitor. The larger dragons hissed their approval, the sky darkening with their wings as they prepared for the final assault. The villagers saw the shadows and their hope wavered, but the humans stood tall, calling out to them with a voice that carried across the ruins. They spoke of courage, of how the dragon had chosen them, and how now they must choose too. They could flee into the caves and wait for death, or they could stand beside the one who had already bled for them. The villagers trembled, but as the baby dragon slowly lifted itself from the ground, its wings spreading with painful effort, something stirred in their hearts. One by one they gripped their spears and bows, their fear transforming into resolve. The baby dragon let out a roar, not of fury but of unity, a sound that made the villagers straighten and ready themselves. It took to the sky, though its wings shook with weakness. It climbed higher until it faced its kin once more. The brood laughed, mocking the sight of their wounded sibling daring to rise again. But the small dragon's eyes burned with a light they had never seen. It was not the fire of greed nor the hunger for conquest, it was the fire of loyalty and choice. The first clash came with the force of a storm, the brood diving with fire streaming from their jaws. The baby dragon twisted through the flames, drawing them away from the village. It struck back, slamming into a sibling larger than itself, knocking it from the air into the river below. Villagers loosed arrows that clattered harmlessly against scales, but distracted the attackers long enough for the blue-scaled runt to strike again and again, its body a blur of defiance in the fiery sky. The mother descended, her roar shaking the earth. She dwarfed her child in size and strength. Her claws tearing through the air like blades, she struck, and the baby dragon reeled, but it did not fall. It fought back with every ounce of strength, lashing with tail wings and flame. Though its fire was weaker than hers, it blinded her long enough for villagers to hurl nets and ropes through thin. Compared to Dragonhide, the sudden tangling slowed her wings for precious seconds. The runt seized the chance, diving in and striking at her chest with all its weight. The battle raged across the valley. The villagers fought with a desperation born of love for their homes. The human led them at the front, not with weapons alone but with courage, standing where fire reigned, shouting commands, urging the dragon higher. Every time it faltered when one of the brood broke through the defenses, the baby dragon would swoop down, scattering them back, roaring until the villagers could regroup. Though wounded, it refused to yield. Each breath, each beat of its wings, another vow that it would never again abandon those who had chosen to stand with it. At last the mother drove her child into the cliffs, pinning it against stone, her eyes blazing with fury. "Traitor, you are no kin of mine," she hissed, her jaws opening to end. To fight, the baby dragon stared back through pain and blood, its voice rising in a roar that shook the very rocks. "I am no kin of yours, my kin are here." It was not words as humans spoke, but the meaning rolled through the air. A declaration that even its siblings understood. The mother reared back in shock, and in that instant the human charged forward, staff blazing with fire caught from the burning fields. They thrust it into her wing, forcing her to turn with a bellow. The distraction gave. The baby dragon. The opening it needed. It twisted free, and with every shred of strength left in its body, it slammed into her chest, sending both tumbling across the valley floor. The earth shook. The brood scattered uncertain. Their mother sprawled, defeated, her roar broken into a rasp. The baby dragon rose slowly, its body trembling, but still it spread its wings wide, standing before the village and before its kin. It roared again, not with hatred but with a power that spoke of choice. "I choose. Them I choose humanity." And with those words carried on wind and fire, the battle shifted. The brood faltered, their eyes darting between their fallen mother and the defiant runt. None dared strike again. The villagers erupted with cries of victory, though their homes lay in ruin. Though many were hurt, they lifted their spears high, their voices joining the roar of their guardian. The human placed a hand on the dragon's scorched scales, whispering words filled with pride and love. And for the first time, the runt did not feel small. It felt vast as the sky. Not because of its strength, but because it had stood against fire and blood and chosen to fight for what it loved. The war was not yet finished. The brood would not forget this defeat, but the seed had been planted deep in the heart of the world. A dragon had stood with humans and survived, and the meaning of that choice would echo far beyond the valley into every corner of the mountains where dragons ruled and feared nothing, until now legacy of choice. The valley lay in ruins, but the people were alive. The dawn sun rose over blackened fields and broken homes, yet the villagers looked upward, not with despair, but with hope, their eyes fixed on the small dragon who stood, battered and scarred yet unbowed. Its wings spread wide against the morning light. The human at its side, staff lowered, breathing hard from the night's fight. Together they were more than survivor and guardian. They were proof that even the oldest truths could be broken. The brood lingered high in the skies, circling their fallen mother, their roars filled with confusion. They had expected triumph. They had expected their runt sibling to be crushed into ash. Instead, they had seen it rise again and again until even the might of their mother had been checked by its defiance. The larger dragons hissed and beat their wings, uncertain whether to strike again or to flee, their hearts torn between loyalty to their mother and the strange fire. They had seen in the blue-scaled runt at last with a cry. The brood scattered into the distance, their wings beating a retreat, leaving their mother wounded and the valley smoldering. The villagers slowly gathered around their guardian. The children approached first, their hands trembling as they reached for its scales. The dragon lowered its head, allowing their touch. It no longer felt like an outsider or a monster. It felt like something new. Not dragon, not human, but both bound by a bond greater than blood. The human smiled, their eyes bright with tears as they rested their hand against the dragon's cheek. They whispered softly words the dragon could not fully understand, but the tone was clear. Gratitude, pride, love. For days the people worked, side by side with their protector, rebuilding homes, tending to the wounded and burying the dead. Though grief weighed heavy, so too did determination, for they had survived, what no village had ever survived before a dragon's wrath, and they had done so not because of walls or weapons, but because of the choice of one small dragon to stand with them. The elders spoke of it in hushed tones at first, but soon their words grew louder. They called it a turning of ages. They said the old stories of dragons as nothing but beasts of fire would never again ring true. The human and the dragon grew inseparable. The villagers began to carve symbols into stone recording the tale of the battle so that generations would remember children played around the dragon as if it were a guardian spirit. The farmers planted again in the ash-rich soil, trusting that life would return stronger than before. At night, the dragon lay in the square, while the human sat against its side. Speaking of dreams, of journeys, of how one day perhaps more dragons might learn that fire was not the only path, the dragon would listen, trilling softly, its eyes fixed on the stars, feeling something greater stirring within it. But peace was not simple across the mountains. Dragons roared in anger when they heard of what had happened. Some swore vengeance, others whispered in secret of the courage of the runt, and wondered if perhaps they too had been chained by lies of fire and gold. The mother still lived, though broken, in body and pride, and her fury would not fade. She swore that one day she would return to burn the village, and tear the traitor limb from limb, yet deep in her heart, even she could not forget the roar that had shaken the sky. The roar that declared, choice above kin. The human knew the danger was not gone. They trained the villagers harder, taught them to move as one drilled them to fight. Not as prey, but as defenders. They planned with the dragon, learning how to use its speed and cunning to counter the strength of larger foes. They did not dream of conquest. They dreamed only of survival. But beneath it all, there was also hope. Hope that one act of defiance might ripple outward, until even the strongest of dragons began to question their ways. One evening, beneath a sky of silver stars, the human turned to the dragon and spoke with a voice filled with certainty. We are no longer just a village, and you are no longer just a dragon. We are something greater together. The dragon pressed its head gently against the human, feeling the truth in those words, its kinship no longer bound to fire or gold, but to a bond chosen freely. It had been cast out. It had been mocked as weak. Yet here, standing with humans, it had found strength greater than any treasure. Seasons passed, and the valley grew once more, green fields rising from the ashes, homes rebuilt stronger than before. Travelers came from distant lands, drawn by stories of a dragon who guarded humans with loyalty instead of fire. Some came in fear, others in wonder, all left changed, for when they saw the bond between human and dragon, they knew they had witnessed something that would shape the future. And so the baby dragon, once called weak, became a legend. Not because of the battles it fought, not because of the flames it breathed, but because it chose differently. It chose love over fear, loyalty over greed, humanity over kin. In that choice, it became greater than its mother, greater than its brood. It became the bridge between worlds. As the years passed, the story spread across mountains and valleys, across towns and distant kingdoms, and when people spoke of dragons, they no longer spoke only of fire and ruin. They spoke also of the blue-scaled guardian who had chosen a human, and in doing so had changed everything forever. The human and the dragon stood at the edge of the rebuilt valley one evening, watching the sunset, the horizon painted with gold and crimson. The human placed a hand on the dragon's scales, whispering softly, and the dragon trilled in reply. Together they watched as night fell and stars shone above. No longer enemies, no longer strangers, but kin by choice. A kinship forged in fire and sealed in love. The story of the baby dragon and the human would live on, not just in stone or song, but in the hearts of all who believed that choice could be stronger than destiny, and that even the smallest act of defiance could light a fire brighter than any flame. The legacy carved in fire and heart, the valley, healed with time. Though scars of battle remained etched across its stones and fields, the villagers rebuilt stronger homes, planting seeds where ash had fallen. The baby dragon, no longer a runt in spirit, became a constant presence among them. It soared above the fields, guiding flocks away from predators. It carried heavy loads for builders. It lay near the square at night, its scales glimmering under moonlight like a promise of safety. The children who once feared its shadow now played by, its wings laughing as if the fire of the past had never touched them. The human and the dragon walked together through every trial. They became symbols of what choice could mean. People from distant towns came to see with their own eyes what stories had begun to spread across the land. Some came in fear, clutching weapons, some in awe, carrying gifts, all left changed by the sight of a dragon lowering its head to allow a child to touch its scales, or of a human speaking to it as though it were not beast but friend. The world had always known dragons as destroyers, yet here was proof that even the fiercest of destinies could be broken by one act of defiance. The brood remained in the mountains, their roars sometimes echoing in the night, reminders that danger had not vanished. But the memory of their defeat weighed heavy. Their mother still bore scars both on her body and her pride. She swore vengeance, yet she could not erase what had been seen. The runt had stood against them all and lived, and whispers grew even among dragons. Some wondered if perhaps the path of fire and greed was not the only way. The bond between the dragon and the human grew. Into legend songs were sung around distant hearths. Stories carved into stone tablets carried on trade routes and told in marketplaces. It was said that once a baby dragon had turned its back on Goldfire and kin to stand with humanity. And in that, choice had lit a spark that no storm could extinguish. Children grew up believing dragons could be more than monsters. Elders who had once spoken only of fear now spoke of hope. As seasons passed, the valley flourished green once more, spreading across the land where flame had raged. The dragon watched from the cliffs. Its wings spread wide as it looked down upon fields heavy with harvest. The humans stood beside it, leaning on their staff together. They had faced fire and war together. They had chosen each other when the world demanded otherwise. They had shown that kinship is not bound by blood, nor by scale, nor by destiny. It is bound by the choices one makes when the storm comes in time. The dragon's story would outlive even those who had seen it firsthand, its name carved into memory not as a beast of destruction, but as a guardian of humanity. The blue-scaled dragon who chose a human over its own kind, and in doing so, gave birth to a new legend. And so the tale closes with the valley, at peace, the human and the dragon standing side by side as the sun dips behind the mountains, their silhouettes framed by gold and crimson sky, a reminder that even in the face of fire, even when the world says it cannot be done, choice can shape destiny. The end.